The world knows the name Trump. It's plastered on gilded towers, golden escalators, and private jets. For decades, Donald J. Trump has carefully built this image of himself as the ultimate self-made billionaire, a renegade who spun a small loan of a turn $1 million into a global empire. It's a powerful story, a compelling narrative, and it's mostly a myth. The real story, the one that made everything else possible, isn't about the man in the Fifth Avenue penthouse. It's about his father, Fred, a man who lived in a modest house in Queens, a guy so frugal he'd sift through construction sites to pick up stray nails for reuse. This is the story of a man who, while pinching pennies in public, was secretly pulling off one of the most audacious and complex wealth transfers in modern American history. He funneled what amounts to over $400 million to his kids, much of it through shady and allegedly fraudulent tax schemes, all while building a dynasty from the shadows. This isn't the story of Donald Trump. This is the story of the real Mr. Trump, the architect of a phantom fortune, the mastermind who built an empire and then figured out how to give it all away right under the nose of the taxman. To get your head around the colossal fortune Fred Trump would later build and cleverly pass down, you have to go back to the beginning. Not to a boardroom, but to the streets of the Bronx in 1905. Frederick Christ Trump was born to German immigrants who didn't have much. His own father, Friedrich, had chased the Klondike gold rush, running restaurants and, according to historical accounts, brothels for miners before coming back to New York. That hustle ended suddenly when he died in the 1918 flu pandemic, leaving a small estate. Fred was just a teenager when his father died, but that drive to build was already in his DNA. While other kids were in school, Fred and his mother Elizabeth started a company, E. Trump and Son. At just 15, he was already building garage extensions for the hot new thing, automobiles. It was a small beginning, but it showed the uncanny foresight that would define his career. He saw a need, and he filled it. Then the Great Depression hit, wiping out businesses left and right. But for Fred Trump, crisis meant opportunity. Where others saw ruin, he saw a fire sale. He started snapping up distressed properties and mortgages nobody else wanted. His timing was perfect. In 1933, he built one of New York City's first modern supermarkets, the Trump Market, with the slogan, "Serve yourself and save." It was a massive success, and in a signature move, he sold it to the King Cullen chain just 6 months later for a tidy profit. But his real genius, the engine that would truly build his empire, was mastering a new and powerful force in America, the federal government. When FDR launched the New Deal, a core part was the National Housing Act of 1934. This act created the Federal Housing Administration, or FHA, which offered government-backed loans for housing construction. For a small-time builder like Fred, this was like finding the keys to the kingdom. With the government now guaranteeing his loans, the risk was basically gone. He could build on a scale he'd only dreamed of. By 1936, the Brooklyn Daily Eagle was already calling him the Henry Ford of the home-building industry. He wasn't just a builder anymore, he was a pioneer of affordable housing, and it was all fueled by federal cash. This partnership got even stronger during World War II, when he used FHA funds to build barracks and apartments for Navy personnel. He was aligning his personal ambition with the national interest and profiting handsomely. By 1946, before his most famous son was even born, Fred Trump was already a millionaire, having laid the foundation for an empire that would soon dominate New York's outer boroughs. He'd learned the most important lesson of his life. The government was the best business partner you could ask for. The end of World War II unleashed a tidal wave of demand for housing. GIs were coming home, ready to start families and claim their slice of the American dream. Federal programs were there to finance that dream, and Fred Trump was ready to build it. This is when his career went from successful to monumental. In the wide open spaces of post-war Brooklyn and Queens, he became a king, ruling a kingdom of brick and mortar built almost entirely with the government's money. His strategy was simple but brilliant. He focused on massive, middle-income apartment complexes, exactly what was needed. He secured FHA funding for huge projects like Shorehaven in Bensonhurst, which started in 1947. This wasn't just one building, it was a city within a city, with 32 six-story buildings and over 1,300 apartments. He followed that up with the even bigger Beach Haven apartments near Coney Island. The scale was impressive, but the financial engineering behind it was even more so. The FHA wasn't just giving out loans. In many cases, it was essentially overfunding them. A 1954 U.S. Senate investigation into FHA profiteering later exposed Fred Trump's genius method. The government would guarantee a loan for a projected cost, but Fred, being ruthlessly efficient, would build it for far less. For the Beach Haven project, for example, he and a partner got loans for $3.5 million, more than the project actually cost. He argued that since he hadn't withdrawn the extra money, he hadn't technically pocketed it, but it was there, a huge government-funded surplus sitting in his corporate accounts, ready to fund the next project. He became one of the biggest landlords in New York's outer boroughs, controlling tens of thousands of apartments. He was a shadow king, his name not on a Manhattan tower, but on the mailboxes of countless families in Brooklyn and Queens. He understood the gears of bureaucracy better than the bureaucrats themselves, using his political connections to make sure his projects got approved. Publicly, he was a no-nonsense, frugal builder. He was famous for obsessively saving money. As Donald later recalled, he'd visit sites after hours to collect bent nails so they could be straightened and reused. But this penny-pinching image was a world away from the fortune he was quietly building. At the time of his death in 1999, his net worth was estimated to be between $250 million and $300 million, or about $300 to $450 million in today's money. He had built an empire with grit, government guarantees, and a relentless focus on the bottom line. But building it was one thing. Keeping it in the family, that was going to take a whole new level of creativity. The whole myth of Donald Trump as a self-made man starts to fall apart the second you look at his childhood finances. Long before that small loan of $1 million, a quiet, steady river of cash was already flowing from Fred Trump's empire straight into his kids' pockets. This wasn't a one-time thing. It was a decades-long process that made sure the next generation of Trumps would start out as millionaires. And it started early. A groundbreaking 2018 investigation by the New York Times, which dug through over 100,000 pages of financial records, found that Donald Trump was earning the modern equivalent of $200,000 a year by the time he was 3. By age 8, he was a millionaire. This wasn't an allowance. It was calculated financial engineering by his father. One of the earliest tricks was simple: ground leases. When Fred built his huge FHA-backed complexes, he'd buy the land himself. Then, he'd create a trust for his children and donate the land to it. His own construction company would then lease the land back from his kids' trust, paying them a guaranteed income for decades. For just one project, this setup was designed to pay the Trump children a steady stream of cash for 99 years. Donald was just a toddler, and he was already his father's landlord. As the kids got older, the methods got more direct. Fred simply gave them ownership stakes in his buildings. He set up million-dollar trust funds for each of his 5 children and 3 grandchildren in 1976. That's over $5 million each in today's money. These trusts paid out dividends every year, providing a constant flow of passive income. This was the foundation. While Donald would later claim his dad's only help was a loan, the records tell a very different story. Fred didn't just give his son a fish, he gave him an entire fishing fleet. He made Donald his banker, having trusts buy up mortgages on his own properties, so the interest payments went to his kids instead of a bank. The New York Times found 295 separate streams of revenue that Fred had set up to funnel money to Donald. By 1975, at just 29 years old, Donald Trump had already received the equivalent of $9 million from his father's empire. This was the seed money and safety net that let him play in the high-risk world of Manhattan real estate. When he took on his first big project, the Grand Hyatt Hotel, it wasn't just a $1 million loan he got from his dad. Fred co-guaranteed the massive construction loan and used his political muscle to help Donald get an unprecedented 40-year tax break from the city. Fred was building a phantom fortune. On paper, it all looked like legitimate business. In reality, it was a system designed to pass on generational wealth while dodging the taxman. Every dollar passed to his kids as a business expense was a dollar that wasn't hit with the 55% gift tax in place at the time, and this was just the warm-up act. As the sums got bigger, Fred's methods would get even bolder. Of all the schemes Fred Trump cooked up to secretly enrich his children, none was more brazen than a phantom company with a boring name, All County Building Supply and Maintenance. Set up in 1992, this company was the crown jewel of Fred's tax-dodging strategy. A shell corporation designed for one reason: to disguise taxable gifts to his children as legitimate business costs. On paper, All County seemed normal enough. It was supposed to be the purchasing agent for Fred's buildings, buying everything from boilers to cleaning supplies. The company was owned by Fred's children and a cousin. But as the New York Times investigation found, All County didn't really do anything. It had no office, no warehouse, no real staff. Its address was just the home of a family friend. It was basically a fiction. Here's how the scheme, which tax experts called potential outright fraud, worked. Let's say Fred's management company needed a new boiler. His employees would negotiate the price with a vendor, but instead of paying the vendor, the payment was routed through All County. All County would pay the vendor the real price. Then, All County, the company owned by the Trump kids, would create a new padded invoice and send it back to Fred's company. This new invoice was marked up by 20, 30, or even 50%. Fred's company would pay the inflated bill. The difference between the actual cost and the inflated price was pure tax-free profit for All County, which flowed directly to the children. It was a money laundering machine in plain sight. Millions of dollars that should have been reported as taxable gifts were instead disguised as business expenses, turning a potential 55% tax into a 0% tax. The financial impact was massive, but the con didn't stop there. Fred Trump then took these fraudulently inflated invoices and used them to justify rent hikes for thousands of his tenants in rent-regulated apartments. He'd submit the padded receipts to city housing authorities as proof of capital improvements to win approval for permanent rent increases. So not only was he funneling untaxed money to his children, he was making his tenants pay for it. All County was the perfect vehicle. It let Fred slash his own taxable income by claiming millions in fake expenses, and it acted as a fire hose of untaxed cash aimed directly at his heirs. It was a masterclass in deception, so hidden in his financial maze that it took journalists decades to piece it all together. Navigating the world of finance, from personal budgeting to understanding complex wealth strategies like the ones we're discussing, can be incredibly challenging. That's why having access to clear, reliable information is more important than ever. It's one thing to hear about these elaborate schemes, but it's another to empower yourself with the knowledge to manage your own financial future. And that brings us to our sponsor for this video. Sponsor Name is a platform dedicated to making financial literacy accessible to everyone. Whether you're trying to understand the stock market, plan for retirement, or just get a handle on your taxes, they offer a suite of tools and easy-to-understand courses designed by experts. They believe that financial education is the key to building your own security without needing a multi-million-dollar empire to back you up. If you want to take control of your financial journey, click the link in the description below to get a 30-day free trial of Sponsor Name. You'll get access to their full library of resources and start building a more secure future for yourself today. A huge thank you to Sponsor Name for supporting this channel and our deep dives into financial history. Now, back to the story of how Fred Trump took his wealth transfer schemes to an even more sophisticated level. If all county was a work of brute force, Fred Trump's final act of wealth transfer was a masterpiece of financial trickery. As he got older, the challenge wasn't just about funneling income anymore, it was about transferring the entire empire. All the buildings, the land, the shopping centers, without getting hit by the massive estate and gift taxes designed to break up exactly these kinds of fortunes. This would be his grand finale. The main tool for this last great giveaway was something called a grantor-retained annuity trust, or GRAT. It's a legal trust that lets a wealthy person pass assets onto their heirs with little to no estate tax. It's one of the tax code's greatest gifts to the super rich. Here's how the Trumps used it. In 1995, they started moving Fred's properties into 2 GRATs. The key to making a GRAT work is the valuation of the assets you put into it. The tax bill is based on that initial number, which creates a huge incentive to lowball it as much as you can. And that's exactly what they did, on a mind-boggling scale. They took properties they had once valued highly and suddenly declared they were worth a fraction of the price. Then they used another clever trick. They split the ownership, giving a large chunk to Fred's wife, Mary. This let them argue to the IRS that Fred, the man who built and controlled the empire for decades, was now just a minority owner with no real control. This accounting gimmick let them slash the declared value even further. When the transfer was done in 1997, Fred Trump officially handed over the bulk of his real estate empire to his 4 living children. On the tax returns, they declared that these thousands of apartments across New York City were worth a mere $41.4 million. That number was pure fiction. Just a few years later, in 2004, after Fred had passed away, the Trump siblings sold those very same properties. The price wasn't $41.4 million. It was over 16 times that amount. The difference was stunning. By claiming the empire was worth pennies on the dollar, the Trump family had dodged what should have been a massive tax bill. The New York Times calculated that on the more than $1 billion in wealth Fred and Mary Trump transferred to their children, the tax bill should have been at least $550 million. Instead, the family paid just $52.2 million. That's a tax rate of about 5% instead of the 55% that should have applied. This wasn't just a gift, it was the whole kingdom handed over for next to nothing. The financial machine Fred had built was now complete. He had not only built a fortune, but he'd made sure it would pass to the next generation almost entirely intact, ready to fuel even bigger ambitions. The story of the Trump fortune isn't just about a massive wealth transfer. It's also about a perpetual safety net, with a father who repeatedly stepped in to save his son from financial disaster. The image of Donald Trump as a brilliant, unbeatable deal-maker just doesn't hold up when you look at his actual business record, especially during the early 1990s, when his own empire nearly collapsed. In those moments, it was always Fred's money that saved the day. While Donald was making a name for himself in Manhattan, he was also racking up insane amounts of debt. He bought the Plaza Hotel and the Eastern Airlines shuttle, but his biggest gamble was on Atlantic City casinos. When the economy soured, his debt-fueled empire started to crumble, and he was facing personal liabilities of around $900 million. This is where Fred Trump stepped in as the ultimate emergency lender. One of the most infamous examples was the casino chip loan. In 1990, Donald Trump Castle Casino was about to default on a huge payment. A direct loan would have been too obvious, so they got creative. Fred sent an employee to the casino with a checkbook. The employee bought $3.5 million worth of casino chips and just walked out without betting a single one. It was a disguised illegal loan that pumped desperately needed cash into the casino, allowing Donald to make the payment and dodge default. New Jersey regulators later fined them a paltry $65,000 for the move, a tiny price to pay to avoid bankruptcy. This wasn't a one-off. Fred was always finding ways to inject cash into Donald's failing ventures. In another case, Fred bought a stake in one of Donald's Manhattan projects for $15.5 million. Just 4 years later, he sold that same stake back to his son for only $10,000. It was, effectively, a tax-free gift of over $15 million, disguised as a bad investment. Whenever Donald flew too close to the sun, Fred was there to patch his wings. That small loan of $1 million was, in reality, a lifelong line of credit from the bank of Dad. The New York Times concluded that Donald Trump received at least $413 million in today's dollars from his father's real estate empire. It was this foundation, this unbreakable financial backstop, that allowed Donald to take huge risks, fail spectacularly, and still come out on top. He wasn't standing on his own 2 feet. He was standing on a mountain of money his father had built, a mountain that was always there to break his fall. When you pull back the curtain, the story of the Trump dynasty isn't the one we've been told for 50 years. The real architect wasn't the son who craved the spotlight, but the father who ran the show from a small office in Brooklyn, a man whose public thriftiness hid a private financial audacity that was simply breathtaking. Fred Trump was more than a successful builder. He was a master of systems. He saw the power in government housing programs and used them to build an empire. And once that empire was built, he spent the rest of his career on an even more complex project, giving it all away without letting the government take its cut. Through a maze of trusts, sham companies like All County, and legally dubious accounting, he passed a fortune worth over $1 billion in today's money to his children, all while they paid a tax rate of just 5%. He created a river of cash that made his kids millionaires and provided a safety net that protected his son Donald from his own worst business instincts. The sale of his empire for over 16 times its declared tax value was the final, stunning proof of his financial gamesmanship. Fred Trump's greatest project wasn't a building, it was the financial architecture of a dynasty. He built the fortune, he invented the methods to protect it, and he laid the foundation that would ultimately help propel his son to the most powerful office in the world. The gilded towers may have one man's name on them, but the immense invisible fortune holding them up was the life's work of another. It was the insane wealth of Fred Trump, the real Mr. Trump. And that leaves us with a question. The methods Fred Trump used, from the all-county scheme to drastically undervaluing his assets, raise serious legal and ethical questions. While some of it lived in a legal grey area, other parts have been described by experts as outright fraud. So what do you think? Was this a brilliant businessman just playing the game better than anyone else? Or does it show how the ultra-wealthy can operate by a completely different set of rules? Let us know what you think in the comments below.